Hi, welcome back. I'm Dr. Carl Goldkamp, and we're going to continue talking about how you can epigenetically reverse age if you do these three things. So do these things to epigenetically reverse age. Sounds kind of mysterious. We're going to talk about you, and we're going to talk about me. What is required for that, and how to determine what each person needs. You always must have these three things. You always must have a continuous supply of specific micronutrients. Call them vitamins, call them cofactors, whatever is comfortable for you. Not in excess. You can't bank these. And they can never be in deficiency. They have to be taken in on a daily basis. That's the challenge. So unlike other metaphors in life, like bank accounts and so on, no, it doesn't have anything to do with that. You can't bank that. You always need to have an efficient methylation genome, either unimpaired by mutations, which we'll find out more about, or compensated for by a surplus of key essential micronutrients. And the third thing you need is a healthy methylation pattern. Only necessary genes, absolutely necessary genes, are active and the others are silenced. What is a healthy methylation pattern? Glad you asked. It's a precise ability to know and to keep specific genes on or off when required. So I use the metaphor of a piano. So it's like playing a piano. Not all keys are on all the time, and not all keys are off. And in fact, to have an incredible melody, it's the timing of when things are on and when things are off, and that's what makes the melody, that's what makes the song, that's what makes the presentation, that's what makes life. To function with collective ensemble precision, knowing when to play and when not to play. You'll notice there's one person not playing here. They all take their times of not playing and all take their times in playing. You, in essence, or your metabolism, is the conductor. How is a methylation pattern determined to be healthy? Glad you asked. What does a healthy methylation pattern depend on? The ability to carry out with precise exactness, and I'm kind of repeating myself so you know, keeping specific genes on that are essential for optimal functioning and keeping specific genes silenced, dormant, off that are not essential for optimal functioning. How do we know if we have a healthy methylation pattern? Here's your first test. This is what is the epigenetic aging assessment. It independently determines what age you are by your methylation pattern. In essence, it takes blood. It can even do urine. It can do other, but mostly it's blood. It takes your blood and it looks at everything that's methylated and not methylated. So in essence, it compares your results to the catalog of all the previous results and determines where your data matches up. They now have this across species, by the way. It's not just human-oriented. It's a phenomenal story. Okay, examples of testings are this. So here you have we'll call it mydnaage.com. That started in August. This is Thorne, a company I'm very familiar with, biological. They have actually 4 different tests that are in one test, and then do not age biological test. So this came out in August. This came out just last week. And this came out, I think, a few months ago. So it's all pretty much cutting edge in terms of now applying this technology for you. Why would you care? Well, let's continue. Okay, what is the epigenetic aging clock? This is what we're talking about. DNA methylation is the most abundant and best studied epigenetic modification that is now recognized as a reliable indicator of biologic age, more than chronologic age. It's more than I'm 65. I might be 47. Don't I wish? I could be 75. Don't think so. So Dr. Steve Horvath's biological aging clock is the gold standard of biological age tests. It was built using data generated from thousands of samples. His analytic method has been cited in over 600 peer-reviewed scientific papers, publications, and was developed using a thing called 353 CPG sites, DNA methylation sites. I'm not going to go too much into that, but Dr. Horvath's clock, the DNA M methylation aging clock, was able to determine epigenetic age. It was first created in 2013, and it was the first what they call PAN, master epigenetic clocks for your whole body. Other DNA M methylation clocks were developed on tissue specific, and it's become, in the last 8 years, even much more finely tuned. It's just very impressive and useful in my view. What affects our epigenetic age? Let's start there. Okay, these are basically all the factors that people agreed upon. They're lifestyle factors, if you will. All right, diet, of course, exercise, yes, disease exposure. So you can think of condition exposure when you say disease, be it diabetes, obesity. Absolutely, we know that. This isn't a maybe. We know that if you took somebody who's obese or diabetic, their methylation age will be way off. Toxic chemicals, be it smoking or whatnot, drug abuse, financial status, psychological state, comfort or not comfort. Are you stressed all the time or not? And there's reasons for it to be that way. Therapeutic drugs, alternative medicine, and microbiome, your gut in essence. These are really just environmental factors that affect your methylation capacity. So any of those factors, if not done in its fullness, right? You can have a diet, but you can have a very poor diet. So clearly there's room for improvement. If you're smoking and you stop smoking, that's an improvement. But these are factors that affect the methylation of these sites, methylation of these genes. In other words, it keeps certain genes silenced that should actually be active. It tends to lose the ability. That conductor we saw, you being the conductor, you start to lose your capacity to turn genes off. This is what it measures. Now remember Dr. Jirtle's experiment? He gave them both mouse chow, the agouti mouse that was bred to be large, obese, diabetic, yellow mice prone to cancer, and a lot of other diseases. So he gave them both chow, but one he gave methylation factors, B12, folate, SAM, S-adenyl methionine, choline, trimethylglycine, otherwise known as beta-ene. So methyl donors or methyl factors. And what happened in one generation, he basically gave it to these pregnant agouti mice before they were going to conceive, boom. And across the board, all their litters, all their pups were healthy in one generation. The experiment was so simple, it allowed for it to be redone, reproduced worldwide in the same results. So clearly, there is no doubt that that actually happened. And it's like, wow, people go, why didn't I think of that? Huh. Okay, so technically this is called a pseudo-agouti mouse because the DNA didn't change. It's still the same mouse that was big, fat, yellow, and obese, has those genes, but it now had the methylation factors suddenly made it healthy. How did it know what genes to turn off? How did it know what genes to suppress? Silence. It got a healthy methylation pattern. So then 8 years later, he did it again. This time, still, he had the same results, but this time he did a little bit different. He gave them both mouse chow, and he gave them both a toxin, BPA, which is what you find in plasticizers. I'm not going to go into that because I went into that in previous videos, and you'll see the link above. So, but like he did before, he gave one group methylation factors. And let me guess, you already know because I showed you, poof, same results. Healthy pups showed up. Amazing. They overcame not just their predisposition to genes, but their toxins. Okay, so what did he do? All he gave them were basic supplements that you can get on pretty much any pharmacy. Certainly these are within our pharmacy. And there's a link for that too if you want to explore that. So methyl donors, again, B12, folate, SAMe, choline, trimethylglycine, beta-ene. They turned off specific genes. They methylated them. This completely changed their methylation capacity. In other words, it gave them a renewed ability to methylate. They had plenty of methyl groups to be able to pick and choose what genes to turn off and what genes to unmethylate. That's pretty impressive. So their ability to control what genes are turned off or on suddenly increased, which restored their normal function. These are ordinary supplements. And in case you think this was just back in 2003 and 2008 wrong, these are now 2021 early life nutrition mental health rule of DNA methylation, methyl donor micronutrients that modify, and now you know some of that. You now are on the inside DNA methylation relative to cancer. That's amazing. Here you go. Same thing, just a different way of looking at the whole. We're going to look at this a lot tonight. But there you go. There's a beta-ene, there's a choline. What else do we have here? Well, methyl donors. I just made a general reference there. Brain, gut. There's SAMe. All right, so methyl donors. What are methyl donors? The B12, the beta-ene, the choline, the folate. This is real general drawings of saying this is their folate acid cycle. This is your methylation cycle. And there's your SAMe. All these are very, very, very important. We're going to get a little more into that in terms of problems one can have, but this is what he did. He basically said, here, eat this. Boom. And he changed everything. Here's another way of looking at that. This is really how medicine should practice, and many doctors are doing things like we're talking about right now tonight. So there's your methylation, there's your folate acid cycle, and these dark blue boxes are enzymes that have genetic mutations that can slow them down. They can not stop them completely. If it stopped them completely, for the most part, you'd probably be dead. But you can see here, there's an enzyme and there's mutations, just shorthand for mutations. We'll get into that. Here's your glutathione. So in other videos, I would talk about this as a glutathione factory. See yourself as a big factory and the end product is glutathione. And we talked about NAC, and you saw how dramatic NAC and glutathione were for COVID, for psychological predispositions, for autism, for obsessive compulsive, to schizophrenia, etc., etc. Phenomenal. All right, so we have SAMe, S-adenomethionine to S-adenyl homocysteine. That's a big deal. This correlate changes to your DNA methylation. I call it the poor man's test for looking at all of this. And if this isn't doing well in terms of a ratio, then you got a problem, but it usually has to do with the same situation. All right, here's another way of looking at it. I like to sort of consider these as traffic circles, interconnected traffic circles. They're the folate acid cycle methionine, which we were just looking at, and there's your glutathione factory. I don't want to confuse you with a lot of data. I'm trying to make it simple here for this. Okay, here's another way of looking at it, and this is my stealing of a diagram that comes from one of the companies that we do testing with. Here again, here's the methylation, here's the methyl donors. And methylation has to do with detoxification, it has to do with turning genes on and off, that's what we've been talking about, so cellular adaptability. And gene regulation, the conductor, remember? SAM, SA, B12, choline, and there's the glutathione. So it's just another way. This little loop over here is called the biopterin cycle, or the neurotransmitter. Notice you have serotonin and dopamine. All of these are interconnected. These are interconnected traffic circles. Another way of looking at it, biopterin, folate cycle, methylation cycle, glutathione. Here's the traffic circle. It's the way I like to look at it. There you go. Interconnected traffic circles that, put it this way, if there is an enzyme, a mutation, that there's a problem here, 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 and this is meant to be highly simple, you obviously will have a backup, and you'll have a problem for all of these. On the other side of the backup won't be getting enough whatever they need, and the other side they're getting perhaps too much, and they'll have their issues. How do we know if we need methyl donors, right? Why isn't everybody just go out and take methyl donors and see what happens? Well, as an aside, back when this concept really started cracking open in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I did exactly that. A lot of other doctors did exactly that. In fact, SAMe was the thing that put us on to, wait a minute, some people would have profound changes with taking one supplement, SAMe. Others would get worse. And it was just nothing you could look at labs. It was beyond us knowing at that point. There weren't these big tests we can do now, we'll get into tonight. But then we started getting methyl donors, which is more than just SAMe, as we just talked about. Some got even better. And guess what? Others got worse. So still, it wasn't a one-size-fits-all. So here's for the second test, genomic analysis. All right, many companies do this. We're going to use Strategene as an example. All right, what we're going to do is identify genetic variations that are limiting one's methylation capacity. Methylation capacity is the ability to make methyl groups, which is the thing that turns genes on or off, right? Turns them off if you methylate it. Okay, or put it another way, how the genetic variations you have limits your methylation capacity. All right, we're looking for polymorphisms, otherwise known as SNPs, single nuclear polymorphisms. Example, folate. They're meant to be the same, by the way. That wasn't a test. It causes metabolism of folate to be changed. Different diseases may develop. So we do know with this coming up that it's associated with cancer, cardiovascular, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. Yet it can be corrected. That's the whole point why we're going over this tonight, is you can intervene and you can correct this. This isn't like, oh my gosh. This isn't you have a predisposition to cancer, cardiovascular, Alzheimer's, or diabetes. This means that if you do nothing, you will have that predisposition. All right, so here's MTHFR, which I'm sure most of you have heard about. We're going to use this as the point man in the story. Homozygous, meaning they have the same gene from the chromosome they got from mom and the chromosome they got from dad. So they are homozygous. What will that cause? That will cause a 70% and arguably a 90% reduction in the function of that gene. That will cause problems a lot. Other mutations exist as well that reduce the function of MTHFR, but this is the most problematic one. So here's one way. Here's one way of looking at this. These are your genes. And these are the numbers. If you punch this into Google or Snipopedia, you would talk about this. So there's 2 mutations around MTHFR. This is the one that's worse. This is the one we just talked about that reduces the function to 70 to 90%. And this is just taken from a client that we worked with, and little family history, diabetes, addiction, and it makes perfect sense. He has a big problem for methylating folate. He also has a few other problems as well, as we'll get to. Okay, here's another way of looking at it. MTHFR, these are the same 2 genes. You'll find this is a different person, by the way. This person doesn't even have this gene, so there's no problem there. And is heterozygous on the one that's partially obstructive. Slows down a little bit. That's the worst one. This is far less worse, and he's only heterozygous. Really not much to worry about. Polymorphisms that affect the metabolism of folate. All right, so your MTHFR status, how much mercury is detoxified versus stored. You can use anything. So it helps with, I told you methylation has to do with detoxification. So think of it in terms of mercury. Let's say you're eating a lot of tuna fish. Okay, if you have no mutations, you're good. You're functioning well and it's precise and that's how you want it to be. If you have 1 mutation of the C677T, you're 50% reduced. That could be a problem. If you have 2, like me and like my wife, you are severely reduced, and that is a problem. So they are predisposed to eating the same diet. Let's say they eat a diet of tuna. You eat it and don't have these. I eat it. I have a problem in terms of accumulating mercury, and I better figure out how to get it out of me. And this is the lesser obstructive mutation. Here's the heterozygous. Here's the homozygous. And then there's also, you have one of each. Where does that end up? So how the 2 mutations compare relative to the reduced function for the enzyme MTHFR. What could go wrong, you say? Well, let's take a look. Conditions associated with, now you can think of C677T, myself. So think of me. Think of my wife. Why is it when I went back and never had Crohn's before, never had ulcerative colitis, boom, it blew up out of nowhere and I was going to get my bowel resected or else. And she had a brain tumor, had to be removed or else. It can spring up out of nowhere. And so you do have things you need to take care of. Okay, so here you go. What are some of these conditions? Obsessive compulsive disease, psychological, oppositional defiant disorder, pain, phobias, PCOS, psychosis, schizophrenia, recurrent pregnancy, loss, miscarriage. This goes together, loss and miscarriage. In other words, infertility, especially for women, but also for men. Thyroid dysfunction, hyperactive disorder, addictive behavior, allergic conditions, aging, of course. Well, that's what we're talking about now is methylation. Anorexia, Alzheimer's, anxiety, asthma, autism, autoimmune disease, bipolar, bulimia, cancer, chronic disease, degenerative disease, cardiovascular disease, chronic fatigue, cleft palate is famous for that, diabetes, Down syndrome, delusions, depression, poor detoxification, kind of sort of saying the obvious, fibromyalgia, probably from an accumulation of all the toxins that you couldn't clear, headaches, infertility, joint stiffness, pain, swelling, insomnia, muscle pains, low neurotransmitters, obesity. I don't mean to blind you, but this is basically how we're going to get in. This is really can get into some granular detail here, which is helpful, but not all gene mutations, polymorphisms are equally bad or equally good. So the collective impairment of one's metabolism begins to add up with additional mutations. So this is looking at enzymes, mutations that contribute to glutathione production or glutathione non-production if you have these. Here's about SAM, methionine. So there's MTHFR, no, it's not on this one, but a few others related. The purple means slow, the orange means fast, but you get the picture. Biopterin, I told you about the biopterin cycle and showed you a picture of it. Yep, there's genes there that have to do with turning neurotransmitters on and off. Serotonin, turning genes on or off for serotonin. Dopamine, other examples of genome single nuclear polymorphisms. Okay, looking for genomic predispositions for problematic genes. Now I'm sort of blinding you a little bit, but I've showed you that before. These are some of the enzymes, and I could have picked out more, but I'm picking out just a few of the major ones. People do have problems. So that guy that we saw, he was blocked here, down to 70 to 90% arguably. Here's another one, methionine transferase and reductase. And this takes homocysteine to glutathione. So this person's going to have, who's blocked there, is going to have glutathione productions. Here's another way of looking at it. This then puts in the cofactors, right? I said you needed appropriate amount of cofactors for all those enzymes. B2, folic acid, B12. What else we have here? B6. You get the picture. But these are common bottlenecks, common enough to look for. And the impairment of these could be problems. All right, the third test now is micronutrients. ALA, otherwise known as cofactors, intracellular micronutrient assessments. Let's take a look. This is what that looks like. This is SpectraCell we're using here. If you don't have any parts, the micronutrients, your body simply won't work well. So if you want to think of it as kind of the fuel that makes each individual enzyme work as best as it possibly can, but each enzyme needs a slightly different fuel. Some need the same. So now we look at Krebs cycle. That's how you make energy. That happens in the mitochondria. Here's the biopterin. There's your folic acid cycle. We've seen this before. But you can guess, if you're blocked here, you're going to have problems with neurotransmitters, you're going to have problems with glutathione production, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll find that we'll do blood work. At the very end, the last slide I'll show you is about homocysteine. That's one of the things you see very elevated in blood work. So there's more than one way to get a look at, I think there might be a problem here. Krebs cycle, I reduced it to something a little more simple, right? Okay, again, we're looking at the same thing. Methylation cycle, detoxification, cellular adaptability, gene regulation. Now we've put in these cofactors, a little bit simplified. This particular person has a deficiency here, a borderline deficiency, and these others are okay. What determines your ability to methylate your genes? Your methylation capacity. This is it. Consuming a high percentage of processed food predisposes you to micronutrient deficiencies. Pretty straightforward. If you're not eating food that has nutrients as we ate them in fruits and vegetables and meats and poultry and fish, if you're not doing that and you're having processed foods, you're putting you're self-inducing a malnutrition. And this is why so many of these issues are happening now. We all fell in love with processed foods over the last 70 years, pretty much since World War II, if not since the Korean War in the 50s. And consequently, in our rush about day to day, we don't get the nutrition we get, and we gradually start falling apart. I always use the expression, where do the tires come off the car? They're starting to come off the car in huge abundance because we're not getting the nutrition that comes through real food. Okay. All right, so we're getting micronutrient deficiencies, which created dangerous deficiencies in the cofactors that we needed. So those people that had MTHFR or any of those others, or CBS or MTHFR, weren't getting the cofactors. That puts that very much in problem. If they have a mutation plus lack of cofactors, they're hurting. So this is the majority of us. 99.9% eat processed foods. I know you know what that looked like. Got to put it in your face. All right, nutritional interventions. Adding folate. Folate comes from real food, not folic acid. That's synthetic. Adding may improve methylation. It certainly does for MTHFR. So it's all about fine-tuning your epigenome, which is giving the ability to methylate and not methylate. That's your genome. All about fine-tuning your epigenome that in the end may well reduce your epigenetic age. Okay. So we're addressing specific gene mutations can make a big difference. Now I've sort of listed these different problematic, kind of 7 or 8 or 9 of them actually, that you look at. Obviously MTHFR, and each one has a different story to talk about. But the biggest problematic one are the 3 that I've talked about, MTHFR. These others, when you find that they're homozygous for the worst mutation, they're going to have a problem. But you can compensate for that. You just need to assess it and know what to do. Lifestyle changes can be tremendously effective as well. So if one isn't exercising and they start exercising, they're going to have a big change for the better. If you are exercising and you're exercising a little more, you're not going to get that much of a change. Make sense? So we're coming from where is the greatest efficiency in that person's life. If they are smoking cigarettes or anything else, and they stop, they'll get a change for the better. If they get rich, financial stress is a stress for everybody. There's a point of you don't need to get rich, but you need to have adequate, more than adequate. Okay, here's the last slide, and this is just generally things that I do. This is a very short sort of, I put the most common out-of-range results of the labs that I take, and I want to point to, there's homocysteine. Look at how many people have elevated homocysteine. Other people, that's what's represented by red, other people don't. And they don't have as much a problem. But look at that. You can just sort of like eyeball the red. But homocysteine, now you know it has to do with the methylation cycle. Now you know it has to do with the genome. Now you know it has to do with, more than likely, these people have either a bad mutation or a collective, a contextual bad, putting all these together that makes them difficult for them to be able to reduce the amount of homocysteine, turn it back to methionine, should you want to know. But you can also look at other things. Look at the insulin is huge. Their inflammation, so it correlates. When you have high homocysteine, more than likely you have a number of other problems. With that, I'll leave you. Next time. Hi, it's Dr. Goldkamp again. I just wanted to say, if you're interested in the topic of epigenetics, you may well want to start here and go through some of the videos we did on this. I think it's a profound new tool that we all can use. So until next time, take care.